Hello and welcome to what promises to be a really interesting conversation today. I'm delighted to be joined by Helen Woodward. Helen is a coach, a consultant, and now a program designer. She works across the UK and internationally, much sought after, I might add, as well. And Helen, I first saw Helen speak at the Head Teacher Chat conference. And genuinely, the presentation that Helen gave, or the story that she shared with us, was really moving. One of those that you sit in a room when you can hear a pin drop because you're kind of waiting to hear what comes next. And the way that she started and ended a really compelling story was something that was really quite moving. And today that she's going to share with us a bit about her background, her thoughts on leadership and skills at the moment, and what we can all do to support that, and also talk about some of the things that she's doing now that I think you will be really interested in as school leaders. So, very warm welcome, Helen.
Thank you, Phil. It's great to be here and it's lovely to see you again. Thank you. And thank you for your kind words.
Oh, no, my pleasure. My pleasure. So I know I haven't done your background justice there. So could you tell us a little bit more about your background and what brought you into education and your story?
Certainly, yeah. I actually started off as a nursery nurse. I left school quite young and started off as a nursery nurse. I knew I wanted to work with children and young people. And then I moved into residential work, actually. I spent 6 years working in family group homes for the London Borough of Sutton. And it was really good, a kind of training ground. So I went to university and trained as a teacher a bit later, but with a whole host of experience behind me. So now I work with CEOs and senior leaders of MATs and international schools and unis. I was previously, my last real job was head of school improvement for the Department for Education. And now, as you say, I design and facilitate leadership programs. I'm an advisor to Zen Educate as well. And in voluntary work, I've served as a magistrate in Greater Manchester. It's 9 years I was a magistrate. And I'm also the co-founder of Rebuilding Schools Nepal, which was set up after the 2015 earthquakes to bring sustainable education to some remote villages in the Himalayan mid-hills.
Wow.
And that's been an added joy, really, being able to do
Yeah.
that over the last 6 or 7 years.
It's an incredible
Yes.
place, Nepal, isn't it? I mean, I was really lucky enough to have gone there spent a week trekking there, and it's just such a
Good.
stunning place. But when the more you're there, the more, and you see what happened on the news, that it was the earthquake was after I was there, you realize what devastation that must have caused in the area.
A huge devastation. 8 million people lost their lives, and certainly the school that we've been closely connected with, the building was damaged beyond repair. I'm really happy to say that the new building, including toilets, is now up. When I say including toilets, because that's not a given.
Yeah. No.
So, but children from 5 villages are now accessing education up to 16, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
And now you've done that fantastic work internationally in Nepal, and I know you've worked in other countries as well, but you work a lot with UK senior leaders and head teachers too.
Mm.
And it's something that I think a lot of head teachers, me included, neglect, and that's that external voice and that person that can be that sounding board and that guide, and that's in the role of a coach quite often. So
Mm.
why do you, that's kind of my opinion, but why do you think that coaching's so important to leaders in schools?
That's a good question, Phil. We're living in a rapidly changing world, more rapidly changing now because of technology than ever before. And time to kind of center down and ground yourself, and time for your own professional development, reflection, and learning is more important than ever. And coaching creates that space, really, to lead change, to look at enhanced possibility so you can take more active action. I got some feedback this week from somebody I've started working with, and it's always hugely, it's a privilege to work as a coach with somebody. And when you get the feedback that goes, do you know what? I had such a light bulb moment. I hadn't seen it in the way that I see it now. And now I'm taking effective action. Now I can see the potential for change. So that whatever stage you are in of your leadership journey, that time one-to-one with somebody to give you the space and support and challenge to help you develop your insight and self-awareness, reflect on your intellectual, emotional and physiological responses to things. And our emotions definitely impact on how we respond to things. It can bring you a real enhanced possibility for more resourceful action, and improved confidence and agency. And actually, you know, people learn to self-coach almost as well. They learn to kind of think, what would my coach say to me now? And ask themselves those questions. So it kind of builds its value as the work and the relationship progresses.
Yeah, and when I've sort of latterly used coaches more, and what I've always found great in it is they see things that you don't see. And also, when you talk about something with somebody who's outside the situation, you'll often say what you know needs to happen, even though you think, oh gosh, if I could not do this, I'd rather not do it, but I know I'm going to have to do it. And when you say it to a coach and you say, right, well, I'll see you in a month, you know, when that month is ticking on that you've got to have done it, or you've got to have made progress towards it, because you don't want to have that meeting again and say, actually, no, I didn't do any of that, because you know they will say they'll be coaching you to reflect on yourself, and that helps a lot. So that kind of view really helps. And a lot of people go about it by using different metrics, and some people use the 360 leadership models. Do you think there's a value in 360 reviews or in that kind of approach? And how do people go about finding out as much as they can about themselves?
I really do, actually. And I know it's slightly controversial. I know not everybody does. I really do think it can help. One of the challenges, and you've already talked about it really, it's our own blind spots. And we all have them, by the way. You know, it's not unusual. We all have those things that we just don't see for ourselves. And however self-aware we like to think we are, the research would show that actually we're just not as self-aware as we'd all like to think we are. And in fact, I know you send out a little kind of post after this, and there's a great little video which I'll share a link with you for, Phil, that unpacks that. So the benefit of a 360, and for listeners who aren't clear what that is, that's a way of gaining feedback from people who work to you, your peers and your line managers, and people who are kind of external partners as well. And the really helpful data is when you get feedback from people who are asked very specific questions about how frequently and consistently do they see you demonstrating particular behaviours. All right, so it's not, you know, do you like them? Are they any good? If it's done well, it's really specific questions that says, how frequently does this person do X? You know, never through to always. And what's very interesting is if different groups of people experience you differently, and where there's a kind of gap, you know, where perhaps your team have a very different view to your boss, that's absolutely a key point to be talking with a coach about where to work. I have a license to work with the Real World Group using their 360 diagnostic. And it's really good about developing self-awareness and insight and the impact that those people have. And that's the big rub with leadership, right? It's, you know, what impact do you have on the people around you? That's it in a nutshell. And that's the crucial question, really. But it helps you identify strengths, and it helps you identify where you need to focus your leadership effort and leverage so that you can bring more value to that, really. And that research, actually, I was a part of that research that Beverly Metcalf was first leading quite a few years ago. And she did it by asking loads of us, tell me about your best boss. And the definition of a best boss was somebody who was highly effective at what they did and who you'd go the extra mile for. All right. So it was about competence, and it was about actually their engagement with you. You know, who are the people that you'd die in a ditch for? Because those are the leaders that we want to know what they say and what they do that makes you feel that way about them, because how we feel about people we work with is massively important with regard to our own sense of self-actualization and well-being and energy and hopefulness. You know,
and some people might think that coaching conversations are quite soft and fluffy, but a lot of the time they can be quite challenging, and you can really challenging of yourself. And the more self-aware you get, the more challenging it can be. So do you think you can teach that self-awareness and emotional intelligence to people?
well, the research would say yes. The research would say yes, we can learn. Goleman really was the kind of godfather of emotional intelligence and emotional learning, and he was absolutely clear that if we want to, and if we're committed to, and if we're prepared to work on it, we can learn. Yeah, and I think it does begin with noting. I think it, really starting time to notice and name our own emotions, and our emotions, drive us towards their predispositions for actions, right? They drive us to behave and act in certain ways. That's why when you're very cross and you draft an email, you should not send it until you've calmed down, because we know that we behave differently when we're in a different emotional state. And we know that about the children and young people we work with as well. That's why one of our jobs when we teach is to help the children and young people in our schools, in our care, be in a good state for learning. And that means a good kind of stable emotional state as far as possible. So noticing is really important, starting to work with a coach and notice, and actually asking for feedback from trusted colleagues. Trusted colleagues who you ask for feedback from is really important. But that's invaluable on our journey, really.
Yeah, I know. And my decision making used to change a lot at the end of the dinner hour when I hadn't had my lunch, and somebody a couple of times I had to apologize to the kids and say, "I'm sorry, I'm hungry and I'm tired," and I overreacted a bit there. But yeah, definitely. And it sounds really easy, doesn't it, to say to a trusted colleague and a friend, "Am I any good at this?" Because you're thinking, I hope they say yes, but you need the honesty in there as well. So in terms of emotional intelligence and the strength in that, is that one of the real strengths, that emotional intelligence, the ability to ask somebody that who you work with, what do you think, or somebody who's outside of the situation, what do you think about this aspect of what I do, or this aspect of the way that I behave? Is the ability to ask one of the most important things, emotional intelligence?
I think it is, because it's a commitment to learning. And I think, emotional learning, I think, is the language I've started to kind of draw on more now, so that we see our emotions as a domain in which we can learn. We're kind of good at thinking we can learn intellectually. Sport would lead us to people to understand that we can learn, we can train our bodies physiologically. But we don't often pay a great deal of attention to emotional learning. And if you're keen to learn about your emotions and how people experience you at different times, then absolutely asking for feedback and having the humility to do that is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it opens it up for everybody else, doesn't it? Everybody else in your team, if you were, whatever you shows leading by example, I'm asking you what you think, especially when it's on a personal level. It can be quite that. But Brené Brown talks a lot about it, doesn't she, with vulnerability, and a vulnerability circle almost, that if you give some vulnerability, you'll get vulnerability and commitment from your team back as well.
Absolutely. And I think we can get more distinct with the questions we ask to help. So I think we can start asking questions that go, hey, I'm working really hard on this at the moment. At the end of this meeting or this week, would you mind just giving me some feedback and letting me know how I'm going on?
Yeah.
Or we can say, you know what, that meeting didn't go awfully well. I'd be really interested to hear your take on it. So I help people to give you feedback by asking them more specific questions.
Yeah.
And so they feel comfortable to get in that zone with you, really.
It's like a pressure valve, isn't it? Sometimes when you have that conversation, and when we'll talk about more challenging conversations at the moment, but when you say to somebody, how can I do this better then? What can I do differently? It can be that pressure valve, and you'll always get people that say, well, they shouldn't need to ask, but they're usually in the minority. I do a lot of work in sport, and one of the sports leaders I was speaking to went to his team and said, I'm asking you to do all these things better. What can I do that's better? And found that incredibly powerful. So it is certainly important. So on that point of people will say, right, great, that's great. I can work with a coach. I can have that conversation with somebody I trust and somebody I know who's got my best interest at heart. What about those more difficult conversations? And a lot of people don't get into leadership roles because they don't want to have them, but they're going to be there, whether you like them or not. They will come and find you. Don't worry about that. They will find you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do you have an emotionally intelligent approach to a conversation which is quite difficult in a work sense, in a professional sense?
Okay. There are 3 writers whose work I think is really helpful on this. Brené Brown writes really helpfully about what she calls rumbling conversations. And that, I'd encourage people to read or to listen to her work if they haven't already. And she talks about just saying, look, we're not kind of in alignment here. Can we circle back? How is it that you're understanding this at the moment? So listening is such a big part about how we have those kinds of conversations. When it comes to more difficult issues like HR issues, competency, capability, those things, it's just so important to be really clear. Clear is kind. Clear is kind. And very often people kind of welch away from having that difficult conversation because they're concerned to preserve the relationship. But you honestly don't preserve a relationship by not being honest and not having trust and clarity in the relationship. I think Kim Scott's work on radical candor is really helpful here. And she talks about caring personally and challenging directly. So it's really important that we give a clear message that, I do care about you. I care about what's happening in the school. I care about what's happening in this business. These are the issues that I'm concerned about. And this is the impact they're having at the moment on the people around you. And it's really important to give those clear messages. It's really important not to do, and I'm not going to use the word, but you hear people say, well, you do a positive and then a negative and then a positive. No, you don't, right? Because it's just bad. Okay. And all people hear is the negative bit in the middle. And neither do you do save ups. You don't wait until the performance review. Actually, if you've got a difficult conversation to have it. Because the last thing you want is that people think when there's a meeting in the diary in 7 days' time, they're going to get it. Okay. And you're going to do them. So what's really important is that we have those challenging conversations as soon as we can, as privately as we can. And that we challenge directly and care personally. And if you're not in the emotional place where you care personally and can do that, then you're not ready to have that conversation. And that might be a conversation for you to have with your coach before you have that conversation.
Yeah. And when you can depersonalize a conversation, it really helps, doesn't it? Because and I think going back to what you said before about emails, and it can be the same with words as well, waiting until you're ready to sit with somebody. I mean, this is my parlance, I suppose, was, come on, and smiling and looking across the table and saying, come on, that's not good enough, don't you? Or, that's not what it needs to be. And that kind of approach, when you've tried multiple other ways, can just take the heat out of a situation where it's not about you, it's not about me, it's about this aspect of this element. And I love lots of other elements of what you do, but it's this element. But it's not easy, and that's why a coach is so important. So so can you tell us a little bit about, I know there's a couple of things that you're working on now that I would really encourage people listening, watching, to get in touch with you about. So there is the coaching work that you do with
Mm-hmm.
existing leaders that are in full throttling role, and then
Mm-hmm.
you're also doing some coaching work about people looking at beyond headship as well, which is really
Mm.
interesting, and it's fascinating. We were saying before we started recording that there are a number of people. When you look on social media, that's one thing, you tend to get a bit of an echo chamber. But when you actually speak to
Mm.
people personally who say, I'm actually thinking about the next step, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure for my own well-being at the moment whether this is what I want to keep doing for the next 20 years. So could you tell
Mm-hmm.
us a bit about the coaching and the beyond headship work that you're doing?
Absolutely. So, I mean, here's the thing, many of us, the data shows, are going to live till we're 100. All right. So it's kind of shocking, but it's true. And that means that we're going to be having careers that span 50, 60, even 70 years. All right. So the kind of old thing about, retiring when you're 52, it's just not happening that way anymore. And I do see, like you, I see posts on social media with people saying, "Do you know what? I'm on my third headship. Actually, I need a shift. I need a pivot. I need a change. What's out there, and how do you do it?" Um, and first of all, that's fine. It's completely fine to say I'm at a time in my life when, for whatever reason, I want to change. So I've been working on a program, really looking at how we can help people through that process. So it's definitely not a program which says, well, here's a suggested career path for you. It's absolutely not that. It's a problem. It's a program rather, which helps people discover their kind of personal why. What motivates me? What does it for me? What is it that drew me into teaching? What are the things that I love? What are the things I'm passionate about? What would my ideal future look like? Yeah, what does my ideal future look like? And helping people develop a realistic action plan towards that. And it's got 4 synchronous online sessions. It's got some workbooks and exercises to help you think and reflect through that process, and also a couple of coaching conversations within the program to help you on that journey. And when I left kind of employment, I mean, a number of my colleagues thought I'd completely gone insane. I think I hadn't, by the way, but I think a number of people were quite shocked. But I do remember listening to a radio show several years beforehand, where the host, the presenter, had talked with a number of people who'd set up their own businesses and said, in retrospect, what would you have done differently? And to a person, they said, I'd have started planning this 2 years before I actually did it. Now, that's not essential, but I have to say it was a strategy that I used. I made sure that I had plenty of leading time, and that I was building my networks, that I was aware of what I could offer, that I was getting the kind of professional development that I personally felt I needed to take me into a new future. So there are lots of things that we can do. You can use our own agency once we're in a position where we're able to understand what motivates us, what energizes us, what brings us hope, what legacy we want to leave, and start that journey.
Yeah, brilliant.
So that's certainly one of the things I'm working on at the moment, and it's very exciting, actually. Lots of interest, which is great.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. And it really interested me when it's you don't realize until you've left education. And I guess it's the same in other areas like the police or the military or the NHS or whatever it might be, how institutionalized you are until you leave, and how big the world is during the week, from 7 in the morning till 5 at night. It's that things go on. There are city centres and people are there, and there are all kinds of opportunities. So it's fascinating, and it's great that you're doing that, because I think some people feel a bit lost. I feel like, what else would I do? Where would I go? Would anybody want me? So really, really interesting program there. And so you said you've had quite a bit of uptake so far. And what sort of people have been coming to you for advice or been contacting you?
And at the moment, we've got a lot of interest. We'll be launching in March. But yeah, we've got lots of interest from people saying, Yeah, I've been in headship for quite a while. I'm not quite sure whether this is the right time, but I want to kind of do that discovery work. I want to reconnect with what brought me here. I want to find that kind of person inside almost.
Mm,
And I know, I mean, Phil, you've kind of made a shift recently, and I'm curious to know if it's all right to ask you a question.
of course, yeah.
Um, what how did you experience that shift?
Well, yeah, it was probably slightly along the lines of what you said, really, in that I'd done some work outside of education, which was, writing a book and doing things in sports leadership, and
Mm.
that had led to being asked to do talks. And my governors were brilliant in supporting me because they said, well, we want to keep you here and we know that we'll give you this opportunity, you'll stay a bit longer. And I knew that I needed to leave where I was because it was too far from home. But it's funny, really, because preparation is really important to know what you're going into. And I was fortunate that they kind of blended together, which was great,
Mhm.
and flowed quite seamlessly from one to another. I've just now spend an awful lot more time doing the school related stuff than I did before. But yeah, I had a bit of a lull in about not in kind of work or energy, but just wondering what was wrong with me, like why I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere with anything. And I realized I was institutionalized, and the world
Mm.
outside school is different. You're not working towards a school holiday, you're not working towards results, summer results or whatever, mocks or whatever it might be. It's a very different flow of existence, really. So that was a bit
Mm.
challenging, but actually coming out of education, well, not coming out because I still work it within it, but in ed tech, really. Um, I've really enjoyed. I loved being a head
Mhm.
teacher, and I'm really enjoying what I'm doing now. So, um, it's there is. Also see people that come out, and almost everybody that's come out the role. And I'm not saying that people should leave education, but people that
Of
come out
course.
say, "I'm I'm inundated with offers and work now. People want me to come and help them."
Mm.
So
Mm.
yeah, I think the main thing for people is not saying to people to do something outside of being a senior leader or a teacher or a teaching assistant. It's not saying that. It's just feel that it's not a prison. You've not constrained yourself. There's a real broad
Mm.
spectrum of skills that people have
Mm.
acquired, which make them employable in lots of areas. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it. But
Mm.
it's not, you don't come out of it and working from home where you're watching This Morning for 3 hours a day and then you do a bit of typing, and it's not that. It's the same pace, and people have got different expectations on you. But it's something that if people wanted to do, then it's worth exploring it, and getting a coach like yourself to do it will help them with that transition.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people go to work for other companies, some people set up their own business. There are lots of options. School leaders absolutely have lots of transferable skills. Um, yeah, it's interesting. There's a great writer called David White, Whyte, whose work I would recommend actually. He's written a book. He's written several books, but there's a book called The Heart Aroused, and he talks about how the remedy for fatigue isn't necessarily rest.
Yeah,
It can be wholeheartedness.
yeah.
And I think if you reach a point where you're no longer wholehearted in your work, that is just a massive energy drainer.
Mm, mm,
And it's really hard to sustain the energy levels that you need to offer children, young people in your school the best possible version of you, if that's how you're feeling at this time.
yeah,
And there are options, and feeling that you have choices
yeah.
is hugely important for our sense of well-being and efficacy, and yeah, all those things.
It is really important, that sense of choice and opportunity, regardless of your background or age or whatever.
Mm.
There's
Mm.
choices there for you. So I just wanted to close with a kind of
Mm.
glib question, really. but I thought it'd be a good way to round things off in your experience of working with so many leaders now in so many different spaces. And you've talked about some of those things that are consistent in people that do things after education and the people you're coaching. But what are the three things that you believe leaders need in the 21st century? And I suppose that's in and out of education as well.
Okay, and I'm going to draw on three writers who I've read a lot of in the last few years. One is Jim Collins, Good to Great. So I'm going to go for personal humility and professional will. And those are the things. It's having a personal humility to want to learn, to listen to what other people have got to say, to ask questions, hear their advice, whilst having the professional will and energy to drive things forward. Create a sense of belonging and purpose. And if you've not read Daniel Coyle's The Culture Code, it's another book that I'll recommend. But how important it is that we feel that sense of belonging to whichever tribe it is we're a part of in our work, and that we feel committed, and that's where we want to put our time, energy, and effort. And the last one would be always curious about new ways of learning, because learning and leadership absolutely are indispensable to each other. I can't remember which American president said it. I know one of them did, but it's true. You know, we have to have a commitment to always learning. So those would be my three, Phil.
Yeah, and it's encapsulated for me by audiobooks, which is what I listen to walking the dog. But I've listened to Jim Collins and Daniel Coyle's book, and you can't help but switch it on, go for a walk for half an hour, and come back with an idea. So you've prompted me to get out with the dog after our chat and listen, get Daniel Coyle back on again, because he's brilliant. But Helen, thanks so much for your time. And how can people get in touch with you if they want to hear more about the work that you're doing?
You can find me you can go to my website, which is Helen at helenmgconsulting.com. And there's a Calendly link there, so you can book a chat with me if you want to, or you can email me at helenmgconsulting.com, and we'll pop a link, shall we, Phil, in when you send it out to people so they can see that if they want to.
Definitely, yeah.
I'm really happy to have people book a chat or email me, whichever. It'll be great to hear. And thanks so much, Phil. It's been lovely to chat with you today.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. You're not too far away from me, are you? So
no,
just
right.
with the Northwest, yeah. Oh, great. Thanks so much, Helen. And all the best with everything that you do in your new program. I think it'll be a massive success, and all the coaching work that you're doing as well, and the work that you get outside of all that you do too. You keep yourself very busy. So thanks very much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Phil.